In the far reaches of space, orbiting a dim red star that barely lit up the darkness, was a small human colony called New Haven. It wasn't much to look at, just a cluster of domes and makeshift buildings connected by narrow tunnels. The people who lived there didn't have much either. They were the forgotten ones left behind when Earth decided it had better things to do than worry about a few thousand settlers on the edge of nowhere. But they survived. Barely. Ethan Cole was one of those survivors. He wasn't a hero or anything like that, just a man with calloused hands and grease-streaked overalls, always tinkering with something in his workshop. Ethan had a way with machines. If it could be fixed, he'd find a way, and if it couldn't, well, he'd make it work anyway. That's how life was on New Haven. You made do with what you had because there wasn't anyone coming to save you, Lila. Harper was another story altogether. She used to fly ships for Earth Command, sleek vessels that zipped through space like arrows, but that was before she got stranded here after her last mission went sideways. Now, instead of flying, she spent most of her time fixing broken-down equipment alongside Ethan. Lila still missed the cockpit sometimes, but she didn't talk about it much. What good would it do? There weren't any ships left worth flying, not anymore. New Haven wasn't exactly a thriving paradise. Food was rationed, power was scarce, and morale was even lower. Everyone worked hard, but no matter how much effort they put in, it never felt like enough. The colony relied on shipments from Earth to keep going, but those shipments came less and less often. When they did arrive, they usually contained outdated supplies or parts that were already falling apart. Still, the colonists took what they could get. Begging for more wouldn't change anything. One day, a new shipment arrived, or rather an old one. The crates were battered and rusted, some of them so dented they looked like they'd been kicked around for years. Inside were piles of scrap, metal, broken circuit boards, and pieces of machinery that hadn't been used in decades. A note attached to the delivery read, "Salvageable materials for colony use." Salvageable. That was a nice way of saying, "We don't want this junk anymore, so maybe you can figure out something useful to do with it." The colonists gathered around the crates, muttering among themselves. Some were angry, others looked defeated. "This is it?" someone shouted. "They send us garbage and expect us to survive?" Ethan stood quietly staring at the mess. Most people saw useless scraps, but he saw possibilities. He picked up a twisted piece of metal, turning it over in his hands. To him, it wasn't trash. It was raw material waiting to be shaped into something new. Lila noticed him examining it and sighed. "You're not seriously thinking about using this stuff, are you?" "Why not?" Ethan replied without looking up. "It's all we've got." Lila shook her head. "Even if we cobble something together, it won't be enough. You know what's out there." She didn't need to say it. Everyone knew. Beyond the thin walls of their colony, lurking in the shadows of space, were the Krylos. They weren't just scavengers. They were predators. Sleek, insect-like ships darted through the void, raiding colonies and stripping them bare. No one knew where they came from or why they attacked, only that they were relentless. And they were getting closer. Ethan set down the piece of metal and turned to face Lila. "What choice do we have? Sit here and wait for them to show up again? Last time, they nearly wiped us out. We can't keep relying on luck." Lila wanted to argue, but she couldn't deny the truth. The last raid had been close, a little too close. Buildings had been destroyed, supplies stolen, and several colonists injured. They'd managed to drive the Krylos off, but barely. Next time, they might not be so lucky. "All right," she said finally. "But if we're doing this, we're going to need help." So Ethan and Lila started recruiting. They didn't have much to offer, just hard work and long hours. But somehow, they convinced a few others to join them. Ryan Blake was one of them. He was quiet, almost shy, but he knew metals better than anyone else in the colony. Grace Miller came next. She was sharp-tongued and quick-witted, with a talent for programming that bordered on genius. Then there was Sam Carter, a grizzled ex-soldier who still carried himself like he was ready for battle. He didn't say much, but when he did, people listened. Together, they set up shop in an abandoned hangar on the outskirts of the colony. It was cold and drafty, with flickering lights and floors covered in dust. But it was theirs. They called it the forge, though it wasn't much more than a glorified junkyard at first. Crates of scrap filled every corner, and tools lay scattered across makeshift workbenches. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. At first, progress was slow. Every step forward seemed to come with 2 steps back. Power shortages forced them to work in shifts, and half the equipment they tried to repair ended up breaking again. Morale dipped low, and some colonists began to doubt whether the project was worth the effort. "What's the point?" one man asked during a tense meeting. "Even if we build a ship, it'll just get torn apart the first time the Krylos show up." Ethan didn't yell or try to argue. Instead, he held up a small prototype engine he'd been working on. It was crude, patched together from mismatched parts, but when he flipped the switch, it roared to life. Sparks flew, and the whole thing rattled like it might fall apart at any second, but it worked. "This is the point," Ethan said simply. "We take what they gave us and turn it into something stronger, something better." Lila watched the crowd, searching for signs of hope. Some nodded reluctantly while others remained skeptical, but one voice spoke up loud and clear. "I'm in," said Grace, stepping forward. "If we're going down, I'd rather go down swinging." That seemed to break the tension. Slowly, others began to agree. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was faith in Ethan's vision. Either way, the team grew. More hands meant faster progress, and soon the forge started to feel alive. The hum of drills and the crackle of welding torches became a constant soundtrack. Ideas flowed freely, bouncing between Ethan, Lila, and the rest of the crew. Each problem they solved brought them one step closer to their goal. As the weeks passed, the outline of a ship began to emerge. It wasn't pretty, far from it. The hull was a patchwork of mismatched plates bolted together in ways that defied logic. Wires snaked across its surface, connecting components that shouldn't have worked together. But it was theirs. They named it the Reclaimer, a nod to both its origin and its purpose. Still, doubts lingered. Could this hodgepodge of salvaged parts really stand up to the Krylos? Would it even fly? Those questions weighed heavily on everyone, especially Lila. She'd spent enough time in the cockpit to know what made a good ship, and this wasn't it. Yet every time she voiced her concerns, Ethan reminded her of one simple fact. It doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to work. And so they kept building, pouring every ounce of energy they had into the project. Day by day, the Reclaimer grew stronger. Piece by piece, they forged the blade that might one day cut through the darkness threatening to consume them all. The forge was alive with activity. The air buzzed with the sound of tools clinking, sparks flying, and voices shouting over the noise. Ethan Cole moved between workstations, checking progress and offering advice where needed. His hands were always busy, adjusting a bolt here, tightening a screw there. Lila Harper worked beside him, her focus sharp as she helped assemble the ship's control systems. Though neither of them said it out loud, they both felt the weight of what they were trying to do. Failure wasn't an option. Ryan Blake stood, at his station, carefully inspecting a pile of scrap metal. He ran his fingers along the edges, testing their strength. Ryan didn't talk much, but he had a gift for understanding materials. To him, every piece of junk told a story. Some were too weak to use, others could be reshaped into something useful. Today, he was working on reinforcing the hull of the Reclaimer. The original design called for smooth, seamless panels, but that wasn't possible with what they had. Instead, Ryan layered the metal in overlapping patterns, creating a patchwork shield that might just hold up under pressure. Grace Miller sat hunched over a cluttered desk, surrounded by wires and circuit boards. Her fingers danced across a keyboard as lines of code scrolled across the screen. Grace wasn't just programming the ship's systems, she was rewriting them. Earth's outdated tech was slow and unreliable, so she blended it with pieces of alien technology scavenged from previous Krylos attacks. It wasn't easy. The alien components were strange, almost alien in logic, but Grace thrived on challenges, like this. "If I can get this right," she muttered to herself, "we'll have sensors that can spot the Krylos before they even know we're there." Sam Carter prowled the edges of the hangar, keeping an eye on everyone. He wasn't building anything himself, not directly, but he made sure things ran smoothly. If someone needed help lifting a heavy part, Sam was there. If two people started arguing over how to fix a problem, Sam stepped in to settle it. His presence was calming, a reminder that they weren't just a group of workers, they were a team. And teams didn't fall apart when times got tough. Despite their efforts, challenges kept piling up. One day, the power supply to the forge failed completely. Lights flickered and died, plunging the hangar into darkness. Machines sputtered to a halt, leaving half-finished projects dangling in midair. Panic spread quickly. Without power, they couldn't weld, test engines, or even see what they were doing. Ethan grabbed a flashlight and climbed onto the roof to check the generator. What he found wasn't good. The old machine was overheating, its internal parts worn down from years of neglect. "We need a new cooling system," Ethan announced when he came back down. "Any ideas?" Lila frowned. "We don't have spare parts for something like that." "Then we'll make one," Ethan replied firmly. For the next several hours, the team brainstormed solutions. Ryan suggested using coolant lines from an abandoned mining rig outside the colony. Grace figured out how to reroute the flow using leftover plumbing pipes. Sam led a group to dismantle the rig, while Lila stayed behind to sketch out a plan. By the time they returned, the forge was ready to try again. When the generator roared back to life, cheers erupted throughout the hangar. Small victories like this kept them going, even when everything else seemed impossible. But mechanical failures weren't the only obstacles they faced. Doubt crept in from outside the team. Some colonists still believed the project was a waste of time. "You think a ship made of trash is going to stop the Krylos?" One man sneered during a community meeting. "They'll tear it apart in seconds." Ethan didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he walked to the front of the room and held up a small device, a prototype weapon Grace had been working on. It looked crude, built from mismatched parts and held together with duct tape. But when Ethan pressed a button, a bright beam shot across the room, cutting cleanly through a thick metal plate propped against the wall. The crowd fell silent. "This isn't about stopping them forever," Ethan said, his voice steady. "It's about giving us a fighting chance. We've survived this long because we adapt, because we refuse to give up. This ship, it's not perfect, but it's ours, and it's going to make a difference." His words struck a chord. Slowly, support for the project began to grow. More volunteers joined the team, bringing fresh energy and ideas. Children brought meals to the forge, their eyes wide as they watched the ship take shape. Even those who remained skeptical couldn't deny the determination radiating from the builders. Something special was happening here, something bigger than any one person. As the reclaimer grew closer to completion, the team pushed themselves harder than ever. Long nights turned into early mornings, and coffee became their best friend. Every detail mattered now. Grace spent hours fine-tuning the navigation system, making sure it could handle the unpredictable twists and turns of space combat. Ryan reinforced critical sections of the hull, knowing that even the smallest weakness could spell disaster. Lila tested the engines repeatedly, pushing them to their limits to ensure they wouldn't fail in the heat of battle. Ethan oversaw it all, his mind constantly racing with new ideas and contingency plans. One evening, as the team gathered around a makeshift table for a quick dinner break, Sam spoke up. "What happens if it doesn't work?" he asked bluntly. The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken until now. Ethan set down his cup of coffee and leaned forward. "It has to work," he said simply. "We don't have another option." "That's not an answer," Lila interjected. She looked around the table, her expression serious. "We've poured everything into this. If it fails, we won't get a second chance." Grace nodded. "She's right. We need to be prepared. For anything." Ryan added quietly, "Maybe we should run some simulations, test the ship in different scenarios, see where it might break." The idea took hold. Over the next few days, the team focused on stress testing the reclaimer. They simulated Krylos attacks, engine malfunctions, and even hull breaches. Each test revealed new weaknesses, which they worked tirelessly to fix. The process was grueling, but it paid off. With each improvement, the ship grew stronger, and so did their confidence. Finally, the day arrived when the Reclaimer was ready for its first real trial. The entire colony turned out to watch as the ship was rolled out of the forge. Its patched-together appearance drew murmurs of disbelief from some, but others stared in awe. This wasn't just a collection of scraps anymore. It was a symbol of resilience, of hope carved from desperation. Ethan climbed into the cockpit alongside Lila, who would pilot the ship for its maiden flight. The rest of the team gathered below, holding their breath. As the engines roared to life, the ground shook beneath their feet. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the Reclaimer lifted off the ground, hovering uncertainly, before rising higher into the sky. Cheers erupted from the crowd as the ship soared above the colony, its engines blazing like a beacon in the darkness. Inside the cockpit, Lila gripped the controls tightly, her heart pounding. Flying. The Reclaimer was nothing, like piloting the sleek ships she used to command. This vessel was rough, unpredictable, and full of quirks, but it responded to her touch, obeying her commands as she guided it through a series of maneuvers. Ethan monitored the readings, nodding approvingly. "She's holding together," he said. "Better than I expected." When the ship landed, safely back at the forge, the team erupted into celebration. Hugs were exchanged, tears were shed, and laughter filled the air. They had done it. Against all odds, they had built a ship capable of standing up to the Krylos. But the victory was bittersweet. Everyone knew the real test was yet to come. That night, as the colony celebrated, Ethan stood alone at the edge of the hangar, staring up at the stars. He thought about the Krylos, lurking somewhere out there in the darkness. Sooner or later they would return. And when they did, the Reclaimer would be waiting. Ethan allowed himself a small smile. They had taken what Earth had, discarded and turned it into something powerful, something dangerous. They had forged a blade. Now it was time to see if it could cut. The celebration didn't last long. Just as the colony began to relax, alarms blared through the air. Red lights flashed across New Haven, casting eerie shadows on the walls of the domes. The Krylos had returned. Ethan and Lila were still at the forge when the warning came. They exchanged a glance. No words needed. This was it, the moment they'd been preparing for. Grabbing their gear, they sprinted toward the Reclaimer. The rest of the team followed close behind, each carrying tools or weapons. Grace held a tablet under her arm, ready to monitor the ship's systems. Ryan carried a toolbox filled with emergency supplies. Sam brought up the rear, his face grim but determined. By the time they reached the hangar, panic had spread throughout the colony. People scrambled to take cover, while others manned the defensive turrets positioned around the perimeter. The Krylos ships were already visible in the distance, their sleek insect-like forms glinting ominously in the dim light of the red dwarf star. There were more of them this time, at least a dozen, maybe more. Their engines hummed like angry bees and their weapons charged with deadly intent. Lila climbed into the cockpit of the Reclaimer, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Ethan strapped himself into the co-pilot seat, flipping switches and checking readouts. "Engines online," he said. "Weapons armed. We're ready." Grace's voice crackled over the comm system. "I've patched into the colony's defense grid. I'll feed you targeting data as soon as we engage." Ryan called out from below. "Hull integrity is holding. Shields are at full capacity, for now." Sam stood near the exit ramp, gripping a rifle. "If anything goes wrong, I'll hold them off." Ethan nodded. "Let's do this." With a roar of its engines, the Reclaimer lifted off the ground and shot into the sky. It wasn't graceful like the Krylos ships. It wobbled slightly as it ascended, but it moved with purpose. Below, the colonists watched anxiously, their hopes riding on the patchwork vessel. The Krylos noticed immediately. Two of their ships broke formation and darted toward the Reclaimer, firing energy blasts that streaked through space like lightning bolts. Lila swerved sharply, dodging the first volley. Ethan gripped the edge of his seat as the second blast grazed the ship's shields, causing sparks to fly inside the cockpit. "Shields down to 80%, Ethan shouted. "Keep moving." "I'm trying," Lila snapped back, her eyes locked on the controls. She banked hard to the left, weaving between the enemy ships. The Krylos pilots weren't used to such erratic maneuvers. They relied on speed and precision, not improvisation. That gave the Reclaimer an edge. If only. A small one. Grace's voice came through the comm again. "Target lock acquired. Fire when ready." Ethan hit the button, unleashing a barrage of plasma rounds from the ship's cannons. One of the Krylos fighters exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The other veered away, its hull scorched but intact. Cheers erupted in the cockpit, but there was no time to celebrate. More ships were closing in, surrounding the Reclaimer like predators circling prey. "They're flanking us," Lila warned, jerking the controls to avoid another attack. The ship shuddered violently, throwing Ethan against his seatbelt. Warning lights blinked on the dashboard. "Structural damage detected," Ryan yelled over the comm. "Port side stabilizer is compromised." "Hold it together," Ethan barked. He turned to Lila. "Can you keep flying?" She gritted her teeth. "For now," Grace chimed in again. "I've rerouted auxiliary power to the stabilizers. You should have partial control." Lila adjusted her grip on the controls, feeling the ship respond sluggishly. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. She pushed the Reclaimer into a steep dive, drawing the Krylos ships downward. As they followed, she pulled up sharply, sending them careening into each other. One of the alien vessels collided with another, both spiraling out of control before exploding in a fiery burst. "That's 3 down," Ethan said, punching the air. But the victory was short-lived. The remaining Krylos ships regrouped, forming a tighter formation. Their attacks grew more coordinated, hammering the Reclaimer from all sides. "We can't keep this up forever," Lila muttered, sweat dripping down her forehead. Her hands ached from gripping the controls so tightly, and her vision blurred from exhaustion. Still, she refused to give up. "Any ideas?" Ethan scanned the readouts, his mind racing. Then he spotted something. A weak point in the lead Krylos ship's armor. If they could hit it just right. "Lila, listen carefully," he said. "I need you to get us directly underneath that lead ship. Can you do it?" She glanced at the swirling chaos outside the cockpit window. "It's risky. Do you trust me?" She hesitated for a split second before nodding. "Always." With renewed determination, Lila maneuvered the Reclaimer closer to the enemy flagship. The Krylos ships fired relentlessly, forcing her to twist and turn to avoid being hit. Shields dropped dangerously low, 60%, 50, 40. Ethan clenched his fists, watching the numbers tick downward. Finally, they were in position. "Now!" Ethan shouted. Lila flipped a switch, activating the experimental weapon Grace had installed earlier. A concentrated beam of energy shot upward, striking the underside of the Krylos flagship. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the alien ship shuddered violently, its engines sputtering as flames erupted along its hull. Seconds later, it exploded, sending shockwaves rippling through space. The other Krylos ships faltered, clearly confused by the loss of their leader. Seizing the opportunity, Lila unleashed another round of fire, taking out 2 more enemies in quick succession. The remaining ships hesitated, then began retreating, disappearing into the void as quickly as they had come. Silence fell over the cockpit. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "We did it," he whispered. Lila slumped back in her seat, trembling with relief. "Yeah, we did." Back at the colony, cheers erupted as the Reclaimer descended safely to the ground. People poured out of their shelters, waving and shouting as the ship touched down. Ethan and Lila emerged to find themselves surrounded by grateful colonists. Some hugged them. Others simply stared in awe. Even those who had doubted the project couldn't deny what they had just witnessed. But amidst the celebration, Ethan felt a pang of unease. Yes, they had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The Krylos wouldn't stay away forever, and next time, they might bring reinforcements. He looked at Lila, who seemed lost in thought. "What's wrong?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "It was too easy. They shouldn't have retreated like that." Ethan frowned. "You think they're planning something?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But I don't like it." Inside the forge, the team gathered to assess the damage. The reclaimer had taken a beating. Burn marks scarred its hull, and several systems were offline. Ryan and Grace worked tirelessly to repair the worst of it, while Sam kept watch outside, ensuring no surprises caught them off guard. As the hours passed, Ethan wandered to a quiet corner of the hangar, staring at the battered ship. Despite its flaws, the reclaimer had proven itself today. It had given the colony hope and shown the Krylos that humanity wasn't as helpless as they thought. But Ethan knew better than to let pride cloud his judgment. They had been lucky. Next time, they might not be. He was about to return to the group when Grace approached him, her tablet in hand. "I found something," she said, her tone serious. "What is it?" Ethan asked. "It's a signal," Grace explained. "While we were fighting, I intercepted communications from the Krylos fleet. At first, I thought it was just standard chatter, but then I noticed something strange. They mentioned coordinates, specific ones, and they kept referring to someone called the Overseer." Ethan's brow furrowed. "An overseer? What does that mean?" Grace shrugged. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it sounds important. And those coordinates, they're deep in Krylos territory." Ethan stared at the tablet, his mind racing. Could this be the key to understanding the Krylos? Or was it a trap? Either way, it was information they couldn't ignore. "We need to tell the others," he said finally. Grace nodded. "Agreed, but Ethan, if we go after this, it's going to be dangerous." He smiled faintly. "When has anything we've done been safe?" They rejoined the team, sharing what Grace had discovered. The mood shifted instantly. Excitement gave way to tension as everyone realized the implications. Going after the Overseer meant venturing into enemy territory, a suicide mission by any measure. But staying put meant waiting for the Krylos to strike again. Neither option was appealing. "We don't have much choice," Lila said after a long pause. "If we want answers, we have to take the risk." Ethan looked around at the faces of his team. They were tired, bruised, and scared, but they were also resolute. Together they had built a ship from scraps. Together they had fought off an alien fleet. And together they would face whatever came next. "All right," Ethan said firmly. "Let's finish repairing the reclaimer. Once it's ready, we'll set a course for those coordinates. Whatever's out there, we'll deal with it." The decision was made. The celebration faded, replaced by a sense of purpose. The colonists returned to their homes, leaving the team alone in the forge. Outside, the stars twinkled coldly, indifferent to the struggles of those below. Somewhere beyond them, the Krylos waited. And somewhere even farther, the Overseer loomed like a shadow. But for now, the people of New Haven had hope. Hope forged from scrap metal and determination. Hope shaped into a blade sharp enough to cut through fear. The mood in the forge had shifted. The victory against the Krylos fleet was still fresh in everyone's minds, but the discovery of the mysterious Overseer cast a shadow over their triumph. Ethan, Lila, and the rest of the team worked tirelessly to repair the reclaimer, knowing that their next mission would be far more dangerous than anything they'd faced before. The ship was battered, its hull scorched, its systems strained, but it wasn't broken. Not yet. Grace spent hours analyzing the intercepted Krylos signal, trying to piece together what she could about the Overseer. "It's like they're talking about some kind of leader," she explained during one of their meetings. "But not just any leader. This Overseer seems different, more important." "Different how?" Sam asked, leaning against a workbench. "I'm not sure," Grace admitted. "The way they refer to it, it's almost reverent, like they're scared of this thing." Ethan frowned. If it's controlling the Krylos, maybe taking it out could stop them for good. Or get us all killed, Lila added dryly. She didn't sound afraid, just realistic. They all knew the risks, but that didn't make them any less daunting. Ryan looked up from the welding torch he'd been using to patch a damaged section of the hull. We can't just ignore it. If this overseer is behind everything, we need to know what we're dealing with. Agreed, Ethan said. But we're not going in blind. Grace, keep digging into that signal, see if you can find anything else useful. Ryan, focus on reinforcing the ship. We'll need every advantage we can get. Lila, I want you to run simulations. Figure out the best way to approach those coordinates without getting ambushed. Everyone nodded, already moving to their tasks. The forge buzzed with activity once again, but this time the energy felt heavier. It wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about taking the fight to the enemy and finding answers. As the days passed, tensions rose within the colony. Word of the intercepted signal spread quickly, and not everyone was supportive of the plan. Some colonists argued that chasing after the overseer was reckless, even suicidal. You've already done enough by driving off the Krylos, one man shouted during a heated meeting. Why risk everything now? We're not risking anything, not compared to what happens if we do nothing, Ethan replied calmly. The Krylos won't stop coming. Every raid will be worse than the last. If there's a chance to end this, we have to take it. His words resonated with some, but others remained unconvinced. Among the skeptics was Megan Holt, a young communications officer who had been quietly monitoring transmissions from Earth. Megan had always been an outsider, keeping mostly to herself. But lately, her behavior had drawn suspicion. She'd been sending unauthorized messages to nearby sectors, claiming she was trying to reach Earth for help. No one had seen any response, but rumors began to swirl. She's hiding something, Sam muttered one evening as the team gathered in the forge. He'd been watching Megan closely, noting her nervous glances and furtive movements. I don't trust her, Ethan hesitated. Accusing someone based on speculation wasn't fair, but Sam's instincts were usually right. Keep an eye on her, he said finally. But don't confront her unless you're sure. Sam nodded, though his expression suggested he was already planning something. A few nights later, the team got their first real break. Grace rushed into the forge, clutching her tablet like it might slip away at any moment. I found something, she announced breathlessly. The signal, I cracked part of it. There's a pattern almost like a map, and it leads to a specific location. Where? Lila asked, standing up from where she'd been working on flight trajectories. Grace pulled up a star chart on the tablet. A blinking red dot marked the destination, a remote sector deep in Krylos territory. This has to be where the overseer is, she said. But there's more. The signal also contains references to gateways. I think there's some kind of transport network. Ethan studied the chart, his brow furrowed. So we're looking at a fortress? A base of operations? Possibly, Grace replied. But we need to be careful. Whatever's waiting for us there, it's not going to be friendly. Lila crossed her arms. If we go in guns blazing, we'll get slaughtered. We need a strategy. Agreed, Ethan said. Ryan, prioritize stealth upgrades. Modify the engines to reduce our signature. Grace, see if you can hack into the gateway system ahead of time. If we can disable it, we might buy ourselves some breathing room. What about defenses? Sam asked. Even with stealth, we're walking into a hornet's nest. That's why we train, Ethan said firmly. Lila, you and I will run drills every day until we're ready. Everyone else, focus on your parts we leave as soon as the ship's operational. Meanwhile, suspicion around Megan grew. One afternoon, Sam followed her to the communications hub where she spent most of her time. He watched from the shadows as she adjusted the frequency on the transmitter, typing out a message. When she finished, she glanced around nervously before slipping away. Sam waited a moment, then entered the hub. He checked the logs and froze. Megan hadn't been contacting Earth, or anyone human for that matter. Her messages were encoded, in patterns eerily similar to the ones Grace had been deciphering from the Krylos signals. Confrontation came swiftly. Sam cornered Megan in her quarters, his voice low but firm. "What are you doing?" Megan paled, clutching a datapad tightly. I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," Sam snapped. "I saw the logs. You've been sending messages to the Krylos." Her shoulders slumped in defeat. "Okay, fine, yes, I've been communicating with them, but it's not what you think." "Then tell me," Sam demanded. "They promised me safety," Megan blurted out. "They said they'd spare New Haven if I gave them information. About the ship, about you." Sam's jaw tightened. "You sold us out." "No," Megan insisted, tears welling in her eyes. "I thought I was buying us time. I thought Earth had abandoned us and I didn't know what else to do. I panicked." Sam didn't respond immediately. Instead, he grabbed her arm and marched her to the forge where the rest of the team was working. "We have a problem," he announced grimly. Ethan listened as Sam explained what he'd discovered. The room fell silent, anger and betrayal simmering in the air. Ethan turned to Megan. "How much did you tell them?" "Not everything," she whispered. "Just bits and pieces, basic stuff. I swear." Grace stepped forward, her expression cold. "Basic stuff is enough. If they know we're coming, they'll be ready." Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. As much as he wanted to punish Megan, he knew yelling wouldn't solve anything. "We can't undo what's been done," he said finally. "But we can use it to our advantage." "How?" Lila asked. "Megan," Ethan said, turning back to her. "You're going to send another message." Megan blinked. "What?" "You heard me. Tell them we're weaker than we are. Say the ship's damaged beyond repair, that we're sitting ducks. Make them believe they've got the upper hand." "And if they don't fall for it?" Ryan asked. "Then we fight," Ethan said simply. "But if they think they've won, they'll underestimate us. That's our edge." Megan hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Under Grace's watchful eye, she composed a new message, carefully, phrasing it to sound desperate and defeated. When it was sent, the team waited anxiously, unsure whether their gamble would pay off. Days later, Grace called everyone to the forge. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly as she held up her tablet. "They took the bait," she said. "The Krylos fleet is mobilizing. They're heading straight for us." Ethan exchanged a glance with Lila. "Good. Now we prepare." Work resumed with renewed urgency. Ryan reinforced critical sections of the hull, ensuring the reclaimer could withstand heavy fire. Grace integrated new countermeasures into the ship's systems, designed to disrupt Krylos targeting arrays. Sam trained volunteers from the colony, teaching them basic combat skills in case things went sideways. Through it all, Megan stayed quiet, helping wherever she could. She didn't speak much, but her guilt was evident in the way she threw herself into the work. Whether it was an act of redemption or self-preservation, no one cared to ask. All that mattered was preparing for the battle ahead. Finally, the day arrived. The reclaimer stood ready, its patched-together appearance masking the deadly upgrades hidden beneath. The team gathered inside the hangar, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the stars twinkled coldly, indifferent to the storm brewing. "Below," Ethan broke the silence. "This isn't just about us anymore," he said. "It's about proving that we're not just survivors. We're fighters. No matter what happens out there, remember that." One by one, the team boarded the ship. Lila took her place in the cockpit, her hands steady on the controls. Ethan sat beside her, checking the readouts one last time. Grace monitored the sensors while Ryan and Sam manned the weapon stations. The engines roared to life, shaking the ground beneath them. As the reclaimer lifted off, the colony watched in silence. Hope and fear mingled in equal measure, etched on every face. For better or worse, the fate of New Haven rested on the shoulders of a small group of people, and the ship they had forged from scraps out. The silence in the cockpit of the reclaimer was thick, broken only by the hum of the engines and the occasional beep of the ship's systems. Lila sat at the controls, her hands steady but her knuckles white from gripping them so tightly. Ethan leaned over his console, scanning the readouts as they approached the coordinates Grace had uncovered. The Krylos fleet was near, too near. Their ships moved with precision, like a swarm of insects closing in on prey. They're faster than us, Lila said quietly, her eyes locked on the radar screen. If we don't act soon, they'll surround us. Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. Grace, how's the stealth system holding up? For now, it's working, Grace replied, from her station behind them. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that betrayed her nerves. They haven't detected us yet, but once we engage, that'll change. Then we make every shot count, Ethan said firmly. He turned to Ryan and Sam, who were stationed at the weapon consoles. Are you ready? Ready as I'll ever be, Sam muttered, his fingers hovering over the triggers. Ryan didn't respond, his focus entirely on the targeting display in front of him. Lila took a deep breath. Here goes nothing. She eased the ship forward, keeping it just below the Krylos's detection range. The enemy fleet was massive, a dozen ships or more, each one sleek and deadly. They formed a loose perimeter around what appeared to be a larger vessel, its shape jagged and ominous. That had to be the Overseer's base. Weapons armed, Grace announced. I've got a lock on their lead ship. Good, Ethan said. Lila, bring us in closer. We need to take out that lead ship first. It's coordinating their movements. Lila nodded, guiding the reclaimer into position. The ship shuddered slightly as she pushed the engines harder than usual. This thing wasn't built for finesse, she muttered under her breath. No kidding, Ethan replied. But it doesn't have to be perfect, just fast. As they closed in, Grace spoke again. Stealth is dropping. They'll see us in about 10 seconds. Ethan clenched his fists. Fire everything when they spot us. Sure enough, the moment the reclaimer appeared on the Krylos sensors, all hell broke loose. Enemy ships swarmed toward them, firing energy blasts that lit up the darkness of space. Lila jerked the controls hard to the left, dodging the first volley. Sparks flew inside the cockpit as one of the shots grazed the ship's shields. Shields down to 70%, Ethan shouted. Keep moving. I'm trying. Lila snapped back, her voice sharp with frustration. She banked sharply to the right, weaving through the chaos as the Krylos ships pursued them relentlessly. Ryan and Sam unleashed a barrage of plasma rounds, taking out two smaller ships in quick succession. Explosions bloomed in the void, lighting up the battlefield like fireworks. But for every ship they destroyed, another seemed to take its place. They're regrouping, Grace warned. Watch your six. Ethan glanced at the rear monitor just in time to see three Krylos fighters converging on their tail. Lila, evasive maneuvers. Lila gritted her teeth and pulled the ship into a steep dive, sending them hurtling toward the larger vessel, the Overseer's base. The move caught the Krylos off guard, forcing them to scatter to avoid colliding with their own forces. Now's our chance, Ethan yelled. Hit the gateway. Grace tapped furiously at her keyboard, activating the virus. She'd been preparing. A wave of static rippled across the battlefield as the Krylos communication network faltered. Ships began drifting aimlessly, their pilots confused without guidance. Yes, Grace exclaimed triumphantly. We've disrupted their command structure, but the victory was short-lived. Even without coordination, the Krylos ships continued to attack, relying on sheer numbers to overwhelm the reclaimer. The ship rocked violently as another blast struck its hull, causing alarms to blare throughout the cockpit. Structural damage detected, Ryan called out. Portside stabilizer is failing. Hold it together, Ethan barked. He turned to Lila. Can you get us close enough to disable that base? She hesitated, her eyes darting between the controls and the looming Overseer ship. I think so, but it's going to be risky. Do it, Ethan said simply. Lila tightened her grip on the controls and pushed the engines to their limit. The reclaimer surged forward, dodging fire from the remaining Krylos ships as it closed in on the Overseer. The larger vessel loomed ahead, its jagged surface bristling with weapons. It looked like a fortress carved from stone, impenetrable and cold. Grace's voice crackled over the comm system. I've located the power core. It's shielded, but if we can breach it, we might be able to shut the whole thing down. How? Ethan asked. There's a weak point near the top, Grace explained. It's small, but if we hit it with concentrated fire, we can overload the system. Got it, Ethan said. He turned to Ryan and Sam. Focus all firepower. On that spot. Whatever happens, don't let up. The team worked in sync, their movements practiced and precise. Lila maneuvered the ship into position while Ryan and Sam targeted the weak point. Energy beams lashed out from the reclaimer, striking the Overseer's hull repeatedly. Sparks erupted along the alien vessel's surface, followed by a deafening groan as the metal began to buckle. It's working, Grace shouted. Keep going. But the Krylos weren't done yet. 2 ships broke free from the confusion caused by the disrupted network and charged toward the reclaimer. One fired a devastating blast that struck the ship's aft section, sending it spinning wildly. We're losing control, Lila cried, fighting to stabilize the vessel. Alarms blared louder than ever, warning of critical failures throughout the ship. Shields are down to 20%, Ethan yelled. Everyone. Brace yourselves. Sam grabbed hold of his console, his expression grim. If this thing blows, it's been an honor. Ethan didn't respond. His mind raced as he tried to calculate their next move. They were so close to ending this. But the ship wouldn't hold much longer. Grace, how long until the, core overloads, he asked. 30 seconds, she replied, her voice strained. Maybe less. That's not enough time, Lila muttered, her hands trembling on the controls. Yes, it is, Ethan said firmly. He turned to her. Trust me. Lila nodded, swallowing her fear. She steadied the ship and aimed it directly at the weak point on the Overseer's hull. Here we go. With a final burst of speed, the reclaimer rammed into the alien vessel, unleashing a torrent of energy that tore through its defenses. The impact sent shockwaves rippling outward, shaking both ships violently. Inside the cockpit, the lights flickered and died, plunging the team into darkness. For a moment, there was silence. Then came the explosion. A blinding flash of light engulfed the area, followed by a deafening roar as the Overseer's power core detonated. The shockwave tore through the surrounding Krylos ships, obliterating several and sending the rest scattering in disarray. When the light faded, the reclaimer drifted in the void, battered but intact. Ethan coughed, waving away smoke as emergency. Systems kicked in. Is everyone okay? He asked hoarsely. One by one, the team responded. Lila slumped back in her seat, her face pale but triumphant. Ryan gave a shaky thumbs up while Sam simply nodded. Grace stared at her tablet, her expression unreadable. We did it, Ethan said finally. We actually did it. But before anyone could celebrate, the ship's sensors picked up movement. A single Krylos fighter remained circling cautiously before retreating into the distance. It was clear they had lost, but they weren't gone for good. We stopped them for now, Lila said softly. But the war isn't over. Ethan nodded, his gaze fixed on the wreckage of the Overseer. No, it's not. But we've shown them something today. Humanity isn't just scrap waiting to be salvaged. We're a blade, and we know how to cut. The journey back to New Haven was quiet, the weight of what they'd accomplished settling over the team. When the reclaimer touched down, the colony erupted in cheers, but the celebration felt muted compared to the battle they'd just fought. Everyone knew the cost of victory and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Inside the forge, Ethan stood alone, staring at the damaged ship. It was a miracle it had survived, but repairs would take time they might not have if the Krylos returned. Still, he couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. They had faced impossible odds and emerged stronger. Together, they had forged a weapon capable of standing against even the greatest threats, and, if the Krylos came again, they would be ready, because humanity wasn't defined by the scraps it was given. It was defined by what it chose to build, and how far it was willing to go to protect itself. Whatever came next, Ethan knew one thing. For certain, The Reclaimer wasn't just a ship, it was a promise, and promises, no matter how fragile, were worth fighting for. The forge was alive with activity once again, but this time, the mood was different. The victory over the Overseer had given the colony a sense of purpose, a belief that they could stand against even the greatest threats. Ethan and his team worked tirelessly to repair the Reclaimer, knowing it wouldn't be long before the Krylos returned. The ship was battered, its hull scorched and its systems strained, but it had proven itself in battle. It wasn't just a vessel anymore, it was a symbol of hope. Grace sat at her workstation, her tablet glowing softly in the dim light of the hangar. She was analyzing data from the destroyed Overseer base, piecing together fragments of information to understand what they had faced. "It's strange," she said aloud, though no one else was nearby. The Overseer wasn't just a leader, it was some kind of central intelligence, like a machine brain controlling the entire fleet. Ethan walked over, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. "That explains why their attacks were so coordinated. Without it, they're weaker." "Maybe," Grace replied. "But I don't think we've seen the last of them. They'll adapt. They always do." Ethan nodded. He'd been thinking the same thing. The Krylos weren't gone, they were regrouping, and when they came back they would be angrier, more dangerous. That meant New Haven needed to prepare for the worst. Lila joined them a moment later, carrying a toolbox filled with spare parts. Her face was smudged with dirt, but there was a fire in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "How's it coming?" she asked, nodding toward the ship. "Slowly," Ethan admitted. "We've patched up most of the damage, but the engines are still shaky. Ryan's working on it now." "And the weapons?" Lila pressed. "Functional, but not perfect," Ethan said. "We need to upgrade if we want to handle another fleet." Lila sighed, setting the toolbox down. "Then let's get to work. We don't have much time." Over the next few days, the team poured every ounce of energy into improving the Reclaimer. Ryan reinforced the hull, adding layers of salvaged metal to make it more resilient. Grace rewrote sections of the ship's code, integrating new algorithms designed to anticipate enemy movements. Sam trained volunteers from the colony, teaching them how to operate turrets and defend themselves if the Krylos broke through New Haven's defenses. Megan also pitched in, her guilt driving her to prove herself. She helped Grace decode intercepted Krylos signals, searching for clues about their next move. Though some colonists still distrusted her, Megan didn't let it bother her. She focused on the task at hand, determined to make amends for her betrayal. As the repairs progressed, Ethan gathered the team for a meeting. "We've done everything we can to prepare," he began, "but I want everyone to understand something. This isn't just about survival anymore. This is about showing the Krylos and anyone else out there that humanity won't back down. No matter what they throw at us, we'll find a way to fight back." His words resonated deeply. For too long, the people of New Haven had felt abandoned, forgotten by Earth and left to fend for themselves. But now they had something to rally behind, something to believe in. One evening, as the sun set outside the domes, the alarm blared once again. Red lights flashed across the colony, casting long shadows on the walls. The Krylos had returned. This time, their fleet was massive, twice the size of the one that had attacked before. Sleek ships filled the sky, their weapons glowing ominously. Panic spread quickly among the colonists, but Ethan and his team remained calm. They had prepared for this moment. Inside the forge, final checks were made. Grace monitored the sensors, ensuring the stealth system was operational. Ryan double-checked the hull reinforcements while Sam armed the ship's cannons. Lila climbed into the cockpit, her hands steady on the controls. Ethan strapped himself into the co-pilot seat, flipping switches and running diagnostics. "Everyone ready?" Ethan asked over the comm system. "Ready," came the chorus of replies. With a roar of its engines, the Reclaimer lifted off the ground and soared into the sky. Below, the colonists watched anxiously, their hopes riding on the patchwork vessel. As the ship approached the Krylos fleet, Lila activated the stealth system, keeping them hidden from view. "They haven't spotted us yet," Grace reported. "But they will soon." Then let's hit them hard, Ethan said. Lila, take us in. Lila guided the ship closer, weaving between the enemy vessels. The Krylos ships moved erratically, clearly confused without the overseer to coordinate their actions. Still, their numbers were overwhelming. They're spreading out, Grace warned. Watch your flanks! I see them, Lila muttered, banking sharply to avoid a volley of energy blasts. The ship shuddered violently, throwing Ethan against his seatbelt. Shields down to 60%, Ethan shouted. Keep moving! Ryan and Sam unleashed a barrage of plasma rounds, taking out several smaller ships. Explosions lit up the void, shaking the reclaimer with each blast. But the Krylos kept coming, relentless and merciless. They're targeting the colony, Grace exclaimed. We need to draw them away. Do it, Ethan ordered. Lila, lead them toward the asteroid field. Lila nodded, guiding the ship toward a cluster of floating rocks. The Krylos followed, their sleek forms struggling to navigate the narrow passages. One by one, their ships collided with asteroids or became trapped in the debris. Now, Ethan yelled. Grace activated a pre-programmed virus, flooding the Krylos network with interference. Their ships faltered, drifting aimlessly as their systems failed. Seizing the opportunity, Ryan and Sam targeted the larger vessels, destroying them with precision strikes. We're winning, Grace cried, her voice tinged with disbelief. But the battle wasn't over yet. A massive Krylos cruiser emerged from the chaos, its weapons charging for a devastating attack. It was bigger than anything they had faced before, its surface bristling, with turrets. That thing's going to tear us apart, Lila said, her voice tight with fear. Not if we hit it first, Ethan replied. Grace, can you disable its shields? I'll try, Grace said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. After a tense moment, she grinned. Got it. Shields are down. Fire everything, Ethan commanded. Ryan and Sam unleashed a concentrated barrage of energy beams, striking the cruiser's core. Sparks erupted along its surface, followed by a deafening explosion that sent shockwaves rippling through space. The remaining Krylos ships scattered, retreating into the void. Silence fell over the cockpit as the team caught their breath. Outside, the stars twinkled coldly, indifferent to the destruction below. We did it, Lila whispered, her voice trembling with relief. Ethan nodded, his expression grim but proud. Yeah, we did. Back at the colony, cheers erupted as the reclaimer touched down safely. People poured out of their shelters, waving and shouting as the team emerged from the ship. Ethan, Lila, Grace, Ryan, and Sam stood side by side, their faces streaked with dirt and exhaustion. But they were alive, and they had won. Megan approached them hesitantly, holding out a small device. I found something, she said quietly, while decoding the signals. It's a map. There are other colonies out there, ones the Krylos haven't reached yet. Ethan took the device, studying the blinking dots on the screen. If we warn them, maybe they can prepare, he said. Maybe we can stop the Krylos from spreading further. Lila placed a hand on his shoulder. Then that's what we'll do, together. The team exchanged determined glances. They had started as survivors, clinging to scraps and hoping for a miracle. Now they were fighters, forged in the fires of adversity and united by a shared purpose. As the colonists celebrated around them, Ethan looked up at the stars. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more battles, more sacrifices. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of hope. Because humanity wasn't just scrap waiting to be salvaged. It was a blade. And blades were meant to cut. And cut they would.